And I said, well, there is no error in the equation. And it's true, there is no error in the equation. But the sentence above it, there's an error. So you like to be internally consistent in your slides. This is a variance, right? This isn't a standard error. That's why I kept looking at that saying, no, I'm saying variance divided by n times variance of x. That's okay. But what Justin was saying is you're better off, but because he was thinking that I had the right standard error. That's not the standard error. That's a variance. So that's why when I was looking at it, I was like, what is he talking about? I didn't really understand, but I didn't put it together with the sentence. The sentence above is wrong. The equation's right. Right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, I wanted to come back to that. The trade-off is still n and variance of x, but you certainly, if you do the trade-off with n and standard deviation, then you have exactly what Justin was saying. Okay, good. So let's go on to something more fun. And that's actually talking about the applications of field experiments. And there's a little variety here. And what I mean by variety is I've tried to pick out 3 particular types of field experiments to maintain consistency with the idea of having an artifactual field experiment example, a framed field experimental example, and a natural field experimental example. But to be honest, they are at very different stages in how confident I can talk about the results. Okay, the first framed field experiment I'll talk about is classroom performance. We're still literally getting data from this, as you'll find. So it's very preliminary, but we can talk about what the data are saying so far. The artifactual field experiment has been around for a little while. I'm now revising it to go into a journal. So this idea has been around, but exactly what we learn from it is still up for debate. So I wanted to throw that out to you, and we can argue about exactly if we've learned anything from that artifactual field experiment. And it's nice in the sense that I'm not obtaining identification off of randomization in my artifactual field experiment. Okay? And then the natural field experiment, I'll start with a discussion about the economics of charity and give you 4 or 5 different papers and just a line of research that I've been thinking about since 1998. And then after that, we will talk about experiments within firms, for-profit firms, as I promised, okay? So let's start with this framed field experiment, using incentives to improve educational achievement. This experiment actually started last September of 2008, and people in Chicago Heights is a community, it's a suburb just south of Chicago. So it's very close to where I actually live. I live in Flossmoor, Illinois. Chicago Heights borders Flossmoor. And in fact, the police officers speculated that the people who robbed my home on July 4th were probably from Chicago Heights. So as we'll find, this is a community that needs help. Giving back to the community, literally giving back. And at the end, we'll see that I just secured $11 million to give even more back to Chicago Heights. So why not keep giving, right? Laptop here, laptop there, what the heck. Okay, now in this particular experiment, what we're going to be doing is comparing long-term incentives to short-run incentives. And I'll explain that in a minute. And we're going to cross those with who actually receives the pecuniary reward. It will either be given to the child or the parent. Okay, and we have certain theoretical predictions of, just from a simple household bargaining model, which I won't go through today, but we're testing some of those implications. And we also think that we can speak to policymakers through this particular framed field experiment as well. Okay, in the end, what we're looking at is some cost-effective ways to improve student performance. Okay, so a little bit about Chicago Heights. There's a lot of in-migration from the Chicago housing projects. Okay, middle-class families are tending to leave Chicago Heights. Percentage of low-income students in the public high schools has increased from about 39.5 to 68.7 in the decade from 99 to 2008. Okay, they have very low achievement. So the two high schools that we're working with, they roughly have 1,000 kids enter ninth grade every year. And about 470 of those kids end up receiving high school diplomas. The rest drop out, and they typically drop out right around between 9th and 10th grades. Okay, so it's a serious problem that they wanted us to attack at the 9th grade level. Okay, this whole ideal is under this Chicago Heights promise. I was approached about 2 years ago with, basically asking me, do you have ideas to help Chicago Heights? And it was based on trying to improve high school graduation, which we're talking about here, trying to bring families back, and trying to stimulate economic and community development. I won't talk about 2 and 3. Those are other types of experiments that we're running. I'll just talk about bullet point 1 right now. Okay, so what are our treatments in this particular case? The treatments, again, are whether the student receives the financial reward or whether the parent receives a reward. And we were going to cross that with whether it's a piece rate or a lottery. Okay, now the piece rate, provided that you satisfy 4 outcome variables, which I'll define in a minute, at the end of every month, we will give you $50 in cash. That's a piece rate. The lottery is, provided you qualify, you have a chance, we will pull out 10 names, and it's roughly 1 in 10 chance to receive $500 in cash. Okay? Your name can be pulled out, and we will announce your name, and then you will get the money or not, depending on whether you've qualified. So we know those people whose names were pulled out at the end of September and who received the money and who also did not receive the money. Okay? All the names are put into a fishbowl. All the names in that particular treatment, and I'll give you the numbers in the treatment cells in a minute. And we will pull out 1 in 10% of the names. And if you qualify, you get a check for $500. If you don't qualify, you get nothing, but you know that your name was called. And if it's in the parent treatment, your parent knows that your name was called, and now she does not receive the $500. Now, I'm very careful in saying she, because a lot of these kids have a one-parent family, and it's the mom. Not all, a lot. Okay? So what are our outcomes? On the grade dimension, you cannot have any D's or E's. That's not a misprint. In this school district, an E is an F. Okay? In any class at the end of the month. That's outcome 1. Behavior. No all-day suspensions in school or out of school. Attendance. No more than 1 unexcused absence. Okay? Standardized test performance, meet grade level reading score, or improve on your fall test score. We don't have a lot of these observations, as you can see, because we're only observing this in February and May. Yes? This was all based on how many people we thought would qualify. We had $400,000 for this study. How many people we thought would qualify, how many people would you guess would qualify per month? You're going to be shocked. No, it's roughly 30% to start after a month. 30. We overestimated that, and then we put that with these, and then we wanted these to be equal. And then that's how we simply did that. I have no general theory about whether 75 is a lot better than 50. But of course, I'm going to have a baseline, so I'm going to have 0, 50, and then this lottery. Okay? Now remember, we only have 2 schools. So we can't randomize across schools. What do you think we should do? We're going to randomize at the individual level. And then we know which school they're from. Now that presents some issues that we talked about earlier. But that's the world that we're in here. Okay, so randomizing at the individual level. Here are the numbers for student rewards. So remember that student receiving the cash. Piece rate, we start with a 187. In the end, there ended up being 193 because some kids moved in. Some kids move out, some kids move in. 193 in the lottery. The student lottery, 199 total. Parents, remember this is if your child qualifies, then at the end of the month you are given $50. In this case, here, if your child's name is drawn, you receive $500. And then we have a baseline of 188. Yes?
Are you concerned that the teachers are clearly aware that 80% of the kids are less than the treatment group? Right? So if I'm a teacher...
So the teachers don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if they found out.
So if I'm a teacher, I would be really hesitant now to give out D's and E's.
Yeah, and we have data before the program, and it looks to us so far that the control is a lot like the data were before, but it could just be that our kids were worse this year, and then they upped them to look like before. I'm not sure, but that's our check from pre-experiment. Okay? Okay, so let's start by looking at the data. September, this is a month. Go ahead.
Do you have any idea of physical intimidations? If I lack one criteria to qualify, and I know I get $50 if I qualify, I go to my teacher and say, I break your car, you don't give me.
I haven't heard anything like that, but I did hear one anecdotal story that a parent was calling a teacher that they presumed would otherwise not call. I don't doubt that there are other stories like that too.
I think we should keep, knowing how much MBAs lobby for grades, I can only imagine how much these people can lobby, and probably their way of lobbying is a little bit more brutal.
I don't doubt that. So then you're going to be even shocked more because our results will be really tiny. Justin.
So taking seriously what you said at the end of the previous thing, there's no partial stratification here.
No, this is full factorial design. Why? Because I don't have levels of the payment. I just took the stand that it's going to be 50. Yeah, I thought there could be important interaction effects between parent and lottery. And that's what our theory says too. It has predictions on it, yes. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. When you do this, you have spillovers, but I looked at it as we have a survey at the beginning where we get an idea of their friend base, whether they're in a gang, et cetera, et cetera. And a treatment like this then will help us to answer those types of questions. But it could potentially lead to, when you say spillovers, you must mean your counterfactual is randomizing at the school level and changing the ethos of the school. So I'm not going to claim that this particular intervention would be a good model for that. It might be, it might not be. But what this will be able to answer are certain theoretical questions about when you put some people in treatment and some of their friends not, what can you expect for a specific treatment effect and testing some household theory and social interconnectedness theory there. But I'm perfectly willing to say that I'm not going to now take these results and then go to the government and say we should be randomizing at the school level based on these results, because I'm just not, that's a compromise. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's look at a little bit of the data. This is proportion of students meeting, these are just grade standards. So after a month, you can already see only about 35 to 45% of these students are qualifying on grades. This is after just a month. Okay, and what I have here, this is a control. And as you can see, right around here, we're thinking we're in pretty good business. And we're not sure exactly what happened at the end here. But for some reason, at the end, the control between April and May went from 26% to about 27.5 or 28%. Betsy?
But are you all worried that the controls are being treated as well? Because now they're learning that they might as well not pick them for anything.
That was the point of the answer before. I'm not sure, but when you look at previous data from previous years, freshmen who are not treated, it looks a lot like these trajectories that I'll show you. But again, that's not solid evidence that there's not something else going on here. No doubt. I mean, the literature will say both ways, right? John Henry effect, I'm going to work even harder. Or the forget this effect, I'm just going to quit. So
And so the previous year, you actually see a similar trend where they start off better in the fall and they get worse.
it looks about like the control in the previous year's data.
That's the school year effect. Like people
Exactly. I mean, you have more chances to fail in a given month. So that should make sense. Now, what happens here then on the student lottery, as you can see, that dipped up as well. Parent piece rate, parent lottery, and as you can see here, this is student piece. So I'd say that there's some evidence of a treatment effect here. Not strong, but some evidence. Let's look at meeting all the standards now. And as you can see, same thing. Most of the time when you don't meet all the standards, it's because of grades. That's the typical mark. Now you see the same thing. During this time period, you can guess that we're thinking this program is having a big effect. And then again, we're not clear what happened here, but the control just has a huge jump at the end. Okay, so you got to decide whether you want to integrate these or you want to look at the final points. Well, of course, we can do both. Now,
John, that's the end of the school year. So
that's the end of the school year, that's right.
Qualification for the summer or something like that, and force the control students to sort of work harder.
Yeah, so we're still not sure, so I can't comment on exactly what happened at the school.
Might fail a grade or something like that.
So I will have measures for you of how many people in treatment and control went on to 10th grade or are scheduled to go to 10th grade. We're not sure if they're going to show up.
Or do they have to meet standards to go to prom or some other some sort of spring event?
Exactly. We need to find out the story about this. And I don't have the story right now, but I think there will be. Either it's an error or there's something else going on that I was not aware of in the school. Okay? The problem is it's hard to get administrators' attention after this. I'm not quite certain why. Okay, so here all I've done here is meet all standards, and I've put the treatment group, I've pulled that, and I just placed the control group on that, and you can see why we have some enthusiasm about this particular result, that looks like there could be something going on. Okay? So what I've done here is I've summarized, looking at the absence standard. This is a control. Dark is always controlled. Light is the treatment pooled now. Suspension, grades, all standards, and currently passing to the 9th grade. Currently passing the 9th grade, going to the 10th grade. Okay, so if we summarize these things, what we find is that we're spending about $160 per student on 700 students to get about a 5 to 7% boost in 9th grade passing rates. So this equates to about 35 to 50 extra passing students because of our treatment. Okay, or between 2,300 to 3,300 per pass student. To put that into perspective about Chicago Heights, they're spending $7,700 per student, 13,000 operational. Okay, or 13,000 per pass student. That's not exactly a fair comparison because we're on a nice margin and they might not be. But nonetheless, this puts into perspective, I think, exactly what our program's trying to do and gives you one metric of its success. We have other metrics like, did you get thrown in jail? Did you quit a gang, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have any of those coded and ready to talk about. But I think overall, I would rate this as a modest success. Yes?
How much is, you think, maybe due to what Michael found, the mirror measurement effect? Like, what if you took some of the students and you just said, at the end of each month, we're going to sit down with you and tell you whether or not you passed these criteria? Okay, you did, but there's no money.
That's exactly right. What I call a peer cheerleading effect. And that's exactly right. We're doing that the second year now. We did not do that here. What I would say here is this is a cheerleading / incentive effect. And we just didn't have the sample size to parse out the cheerleading effect. Now we will in the second round. But you're exactly right. I think that's an interesting, that has not worked in the past in other areas, but I think it's worth looking at now that we see this. Because could be a very cost-effective way of doing things. Yeah, I'm worried less about that because as I'll show you, we'll also have standardized tests. And we'll have a result on the standardized test too. I'd be more worried about that this is just a cheerleading effect. Somebody cares about what you're doing and you've responded that way and the money just is a nice add. I don't think that's true. I think cheerleading will do poorly and the money is a big reason for this particular community, but I can't speak too swiftly about that right now. Yes.
Are you planning to keep paying them for all high school? Or
No, so now we will follow these people through and look exactly at how this notion affects going through, and we will start to treat other students as well.
I think that's very important because there is a risk
I agree.
that after this post-day,
Look, it might be the case that we've just prolonged the inevitable, and we've kept a bad person in the classroom causing trouble who should have never been in the classroom, but we've gotten them to 10th grade, but then after the money's gone, they're gone by Thanksgiving. That could be true. We'll find out. Yeah, and that's one reason why we want to let them go now. Yes? So the one that's significant is this point is significant at about the 7% level. These were all significant at better than the 5% level. Okay? Yes? They're paid at the end of each month. We have a meeting. And in the lottery, the names are picked, and they run up and jump around and get their cash. Yeah, and also the composition of failure. So is it true, maybe in the treatment you're only failing one, where in the others you're failing 2, 3, or 4. None of that data work has been done. Or if your name's called and you didn't qualify, then are you a star student afterwards? Which is, I kind of did the teaser at the beginning. I don't know that result. Exactly. Exactly. It just prolongs it. And then maybe there's some value in keeping them afloat, right? Even though they failed in the end, there's still value there. Yeah. Yes?
What was your expected minimum detected effective? Were you thinking for an 80% power instead of thinking about the 20 lessons? How does that
Yeah. So you can do it in your head right now, right? I told you a half standard deviation is 64, right? So and then I gave you a tenth is 1568. Right? So you can see that we still need pretty large effects. Okay. I mean, not lab large, but large enough. Yeah. Okay. So how did we tie in one-time incentives? We also went into these schools. So we have access now, all the K through 8s and the 2 high schools, we have access to run experiments in. We ran some incentivized experiments just on standardized tests for the 8th and the 10th graders. We didn't want to go in and mess around with the 9th graders because they're incented in the long run, in our long run program. But what we did with these groups is we simply walked in the morning of the test. And if you were in the $1 group, you were told if you improve on your score from last fall, or if you're over the standard, you will receive $1. We have the same statement for 10 and the same statement for 20, and we also have a control, which is don't even enter at all. Go ahead.
How does dealing with subjects work on this kind of thing? You need to get active consent from parents to the population?
No, if we had to get active consent, I think it would have been very hard to do this. So we give a consent form that says, if you want to opt out, sign this form and send it back in, and then your son or daughter will be opted out of the experiment. So we use an opt-out consent form, and I think this sort of thing should fall under a different type of review than giving somebody drugs, something like that. These types of experiments seem to me to be relatively innocuous.
No, I agree,
But nonetheless, we had a reverse consent form that we ran through the IRB, and that's what they did. Okay? What do you think happens here when I go from 0 to 1 and 1 to 10, 10 to 20? Just announcing it in the morning, so they could have partied all night, not knowing that the incentive was coming in the morning. What do you think happens? Can I get the same oomph just from this as what I'm paying all that other money for if I'm just interested in standardized tests? Do you think so? Let's see. Okay. Let's start over here. This is a baseline. And this is improvements in standard deviations, test scores between fall and spring. Baseline, you can see they improved roughly 0.28 standard deviations over that time period. If we give them $1 for the 10th grade reading incentive, it only happened with 10th graders, though. It did not happen with 8th graders, as you can see. But give them $1, and the school administrators were really happy we did that, right? Why were they happy? Because they get in trouble when they have, I'm speaking facetiously, of course, they get in trouble when their kids do poorly on the standardized exams. So they weren't too happy with us giving $1, and as you can see, the average went down 0.4 standard deviations. $10 in that case was flat, 20 looked pretty good. Now in the 8th grade, you can see here does not look so good for math. For some reason, the 10 is higher. Here, everything goes up. And what I put in over here is the treatment and control for the 9th grade. That's our long-term project. So now you can put these dollar values, 10th grade reading scores from 0 to 20, it's $59 per standard deviation improvement. If you're just about standardized test scores, then this tells you something clear, because that $59 is a lot cheaper than $253, which is the regular Chicago Heights Miracle Program. Right? And here, of course, we don't have any effect. This one is about $100 per standard deviation improvement. It's just walking in the morning of the test and paying a meaningful incentive. If you're into standardized test scores, these data would at least suggest between what we did in the Miracle Program and what you can do walking in, it's walk in the morning, of course. You get much more bang for your buck. I'm not advocating this, of course. I'm just saying, I'm making a positive statement here, not a normative one, in our data. This is all about effort, I think. It's all about effort. Millions of dollars are given to schools based on these tests. That's why I was arguing that. I'm sure the administrators didn't really like that, because the money that they receive in their school district depends on how well their kids do on standardized test scores. That's why they care. This shows you exactly why you might not want to use such a thing and less effort. Yeah.
Once the school sees this, they start giving sort of some of the money back to the students in this way to increase the standardized score without increasing knowledge.
Increases effort. Any questions about this? Yes? Yeah, it is huge, and my initial thought is that this could happen in all of the treatments. There's a little, not yet a stylized result in the experimental community, that if you incent people at a really small rate, you crowd out intrinsic motivation with the extrinsic motivation, and then it dilutes the effort. So this would be under, now it could be several models. These guys are telling me that the standardized test really isn't that important, where before I thought it was important, so I'm going to try harder. But now they're telling me only $1. I'm not going to try. I mean, that's one type of model. There are other models in public goods where if you think about every morning, if you take a bag of cans out to the curb and you're receiving no financial incentive, your neighbors might call you an environmental steward. But the minute that they put a nickel a can of monetary incentives and you take the bag out, I'm sure your neighbors are not calling you an environmental steward anymore. They're calling you a greedy something. Right? So that's consistent with that, but it only happens here with 10th graders, not 8th graders. So
But if you look at the distribution for that group, is it a very small percentage of kids just have in the same class who get annoyed and each other decide we're just not going to score anything on this test?
these are reasonably large samples, so this isn't a small sample issue. Wayne?
You've got 3 tests there, and you get sort of 3 samples, and on one of them $1 does the worst, and another it does the best.
Yeah.
Each one of the 3 different ones, a different amount of reward.
Exactly.
Sort of test. So it seems to me that trying to pick the one that fits the story you have to say seems that I'd want to see a lot.
I agree. That's why I didn't try to spin a story. When I was asked a question, I tried to give a reason why that could be the case. Clearly, this isn't a general result in our data set. Yeah. Okay. Good. Where are we going now? I talked about the $11 million. That's going to be going to some early education interventions. Our thoughts right now are in the realm that if you really want to make a difference, most of these ninth graders are reading at a fourth grade level or a fifth grade level. It's very hard for them, of course, to catch up. So maybe we should be focusing our attention on pre-K programs. That's exactly where the early education and intervention program is going. And the teacher incentive program is something that we're thinking instead of incentivizing the students, maybe we should be incentivizing the teachers. And it's hard, right? Because you get into this outcome space that you might not want to be in. And standardized tests are one thing, and you can think about that particular outcome, but the rest of them, you might have some trouble implementing it in a clean way and get clean data. But that's where this particular set of framed field experiments, the line of research is going. Okay? Okay, well, let's go down a different path. And let's think about an artifactual field experiment that might complement some of the work that Michael will be talking about this afternoon. And that is in this area of gender and competition, which I'm not a creator of. The original creators include Yuri Ganese and Aldo Rusticchini and Muriel Niederle, Lisa Westerlund. They're doing very interesting work that is at least suggesting that women shy away from competition. Okay? So one stylized result from this literature has been that it appears that women tend to select into competitive environments with a smaller probability than counterpart men. I'm not going to take a stand on whether that's risk aversion, true competitive preferences, etc. Let's leave it here for now. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Let's add some flavor. And this is one of the studies from the group. So I have on the y-axis the fraction of people who choose to compete. Okay, so what does that mean? They bring in a group of students and they tell them, today you will be solving anagrams for 5 minutes. And to pay you for the number of anagrams that you correctly solve, you can either choose a piece rate scheme, which will pay you, say, 50 cents per anagram solved, or you can choose a tournament scheme, which if you solve more than the anonymous person next door, you will receive $1.50 per anagram solved. If you solve fewer, you will receive 0. And what they find in these particular studies is, regardless of whether it's say a female-dominated task, and what I mean by female-dominated task is that females tend to do better than males at solving anagrams. In this case, 40% of men choose to compete, 25% of women choose to compete. Shooting basket, this should say basketball, roughly 52% of men choose to compete, and a roughly 15% of women choose to compete. This is the result that these authors have been pushing in the literature. Yes. No. Okay. So when I read the literature, I started to think about what could be causing these differences in behavior. Right away, you can go to risk aversion. You can go to several other potential explanations, which Lisa Westerlund and Muriel in part took off the table with their recent QJE paper. But for me, I was thinking along the lines of sex versus gender. Because remember, the experiments here, you're looking at something that has arisen endogenously, gender, and then you're placing the controls around that variable that has arisen endogenously, and you're trying to interpret what the data are telling you. You're not achieving identification off randomization, unless you would say this is all sex. Right? Now, by sex, I mean what you're born with. By gender, I mean what you're born with plus what society tells you are, and what society tells you is appropriate behavior. Okay? So I was thinking about a straw man hypothesis. And just entertain me for a few moments. A straw man hypothesis of the form, on average, in every society, men are more competitively inclined than women. Now, if I want to test that straw man hypothesis, one first step would be to think about going to two distinct societies and trying to choose societies that are all the way from, let's say, matrilineal to patriarchal. There are no matriarchal societies that I know of. Okay, so that's exactly what this artifactual field experiment will try to do. Okay, so where is my patriarchal society? Michael, can you tell me what tribe I'm dealing with here? I'm just south of your stomping ground. This is the Maasai tribe. Okay, the red-robed Maasai tribe. Are women treated very well? Anybody know about the Maasai in this area? Are women treated well? They're not. In fact, they're treated like property. In fact, if you own 11 head of cattle, that gives you the right to have one more wife. And the long and short of it is that this is a very male-dominated society. So think about this as a cross-country regression. We shouldn't get too excited. That's the way I think you should think about this particular line of research so far. Okay? So now I want to go all the way to the other side to a matriarchal society, and I'm going to go here, and this isn't the safest part of India. Right, anyone recognize what society would be up here that's matrilineal? This is a Kasi society. All of the wealth in the Kasi society runs through the youngest female in the family. If you send one child to school, it will be the female in the family. Men have argued for years that they deserve equal rights and equal wealth ownership. It's not quite as far as a patriarchal society, but some men have felt that they need to develop groups that ensure that they have the proper rights within the society. I agree with Michael that it's too hard for me to keep track of all of these societies, so I just choose two, and then I just stick with them. So we've been back now to India 5 or 6 times to try to figure out exactly what's going on in these data. It's just easier for me to try to think about what's going on in this society rather than be all around the world. Now, I'm not an anthropologist, but I'm told that these two quotes do a reasonable job in dictating exactly what's going on in these two societies. My favorite is from the Kasi man. We are sick of playing the roles of breeding bulls and babysitters. Of course, the Maasai women think they're treated like donkeys. But now, what in the world do? Do you go here and solve anagrams? No, why? Because the Maasai women and the men will refuse to pick up a pencil. So that's hard. Well, what task can you think about using? They have a very hard time thinking abstractly as well. So whenever you see experiments run in these types of societies, when it involves abstract thinking, be very careful. We ran several experiments, and you can see there's just a lot of noise when you tax these types to think in an abstract way. Okay? So what did we do? You're going to think I'm crazy, but it's the best idea we had. We had men and women throw 10 tennis balls in a bucket. And they ran through the exact same experiment. It's 3 meters away. They're told you have 10 shots, 10 attempts. If you choose the piece rate, you are given roughly 50 cents, which at that time, I believe, was a few weeks' worth of wages. These are pretty high stakes. If you chose to compete, every one you made, if you made more than the anonymous partner, you received $1.50. And we simply did the exact same type of experiment with folks in the Maasai tribe and with folks in the Khasi tribe. Okay? Okay, so what I can tell you, though, is that the distributions are not different across men and women in either of these two societies. What they're good at is this. What they're not so good at is this. Even though when we went back the second time, the Khasi were really good at this. But the first time they... So we wanted a first inclination of like competitive tendencies. Yeah, what I'm saying is that when you look at the distribution of makes in this particular game, they're similar. I'm not going to take a stand on what are the underlying motivations if I see. Let's talk about the results when you see them. So it's something about society that's giving women more ability, the way you're defining it, than in the Maasai tribe. That's the whole idea, isn't it? I'm trying to get at this idea, if it's straight biology, and society cannot overcome the biological differences, I'm not going to foreshadow my results. But I'm testing my straw man hypothesis, and it will be a cross-country regression. I feel like I'm on firm ground there. Okay? Go ahead. Yes. They're in these are done in classrooms, and they're in a different classroom. Throwing at the same time, they never learn who that anonymous competitor was, and they're all paid in private. But we don't know what they do with their cash when they leave. It might be the case that the Maasai women, they're forced to give the money to the husband. We don't know. When they did, we said we can't tell you. The second round of experiments, we told them explicitly the gender of their, which I don't have here. But when they asked, we did not tell them. Yes. Exactly. And this might be a case of just trust, that the initial results are all based on men tend to trust the experimenter more than women in the U.S., and it's all about that. Exactly. What we did here to account for that is we had them play these trust games, and then we try to control for that. So if you believe you're getting something like that, it at least the result stands even after you control for, quote, trust the way that we measured it in a standard trust game. But short of that, you're exactly right. It's the same as risk aversion, isn't it? With the lottery, you have higher variance. Right? So then we did these little risk games, and then we try to control for that too. Right? So we try to take on a few of the major obstacles, but certainly we have not taken them all on in this first experiment. So I take Michael's point earlier that this is a good way to look at behavior in high-stakes games, and you can vary stakes easily. This particular result, we did not vary stakes here, but in the second and third rounds we did, and the results more or less hold up. But I think that that's a big use, an important use in the end of these types of environments for artifactual field experiments, that you will be able to liberally vary the stakes and then look at stakes effects in that society. And then you hope, of course, it doesn't interact with something in the society that would frustrate any generalizability, but you don't know without a theory and more empirical work. Okay, so what do you think happens? Go ahead. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to show you the gimme. Yes. In this round, no. In the second and third rounds, we did, and then we had feedback. So we said, you're playing against a male. How many do you think you will make? How many do you think he will make? Do it. Then we tell them, and then we have them make the choice again to see if men and women respond differently to feedback. Yeah. You can see right away when you set this up that there are then a million other experiments that it leads to, and that's exactly right. That's, in a way, it's seductive. Yeah. Okay? So Tanzania, well, that looks like America. I don't know if that's good or bad, Luigi, but nonetheless, it looks like America. When you run these in the U.S., this is about what you get. Men compete at a rate of 50%, women at a rate of 25%. Okay? Now, for those of you who have not seen this, let me ask you, what do you think is going to happen when I click? Elizabeth, you probably haven't seen it. Are you paying attention? Okay, what do you think is going to happen? I like to do this because if I put it up there, everyone says, oh, that was obvious. But when I don't, I usually get a room of about 50-50 split, and then we can argue about what it means. Okay. Why would that worry you, though? Because Wayne right in front of you is saying, I hope it looks the same. No, not that he would. But Luigi? Even worse? Oh, reverse. I thought you said even worse. Okay, good. We have one on each side. And that's exactly what does happen. Those two, these two are significant different from each other. These two are as well. These two are. This is close. Okay. Now, we can let our imaginations run wild, but let me just put a few controversial things up there for speculative interpretations. Caste society may remove social barriers that prevent naturally competitive women from expressing their true personalities. That's consistent with this. It's also consistent that it may allow competitive women to earn greater rewards for their effort and pass on wealth to their daughters. Right? And I'm sure you can spin out a lot of stories as well. But it does, I think, begin this discussion. At least we're trying to think about, in this sense, how powerful is socialization? How powerful can socialization be? And it at least opens up the opportunity to look at other quirky things, maybe in the U.S. or other areas where people are randomized. Again, these people are not randomized into the societies either, so putting control around the society. And to refine this type of finding, what we're doing is we're going the biological route now, and we're going over and taking testosterone and blood to find out if the biological markers are fundamentally different. And the blood ran into problems because a few of the chiefs thought that we were going to take the blood and feed it to the snakes, and the snakes would then come back and kill them. So that got shot down after a few villages, which our person on the ground there promised us that these chiefs agreed to give blood, so we ended up getting a bunch of saliva, which is fine for testosterone. Okay? Now, I think it's fair to say that we should be thinking hard about replicating these results, and we should think hard about other types of experiments that can help to refine the interpretation of these data. I'm willing to go that far. Any questions on this? Is that okay? Now, you were skeptical. Is that an all right interpretation? Okay, good. That means no, I'm in trouble. Any other issues with this? Yes, go ahead, Betsy. I agree. I could look at CEOs, and I think women would be very competitive CEOs. And
You want to worry about the selection, because I think that a woman chooses to be a CEO is probably different. But you could take people who were, 75 to 80% of people live in the state they were born in. You could take people who are still living in the state they were born in. So in that sense, they're sort of randomly assigned to be in the South, which training socializes people somewhat differently than the Northeast.
ex-
Presumably I would have expected you would see variance. Maybe not at the extreme level you're sort of clear, but that would at least tell us something about how small differences can change.
I'm with you. And I wish I had one more set of bars here, because right next to these Cassie societies are some patriarchal Cassie societies. They look like this. So right next door, you have this large difference as well. I think that's where you're going with that's right. That's our new control group now, the patriarchal societies, and we haven't gone back to the Maasai tribe. We've just focused on the Patri and Matri societies in India. They're right next to each other, and they have very little crossover. Very, very few people will go from one tribe to the other. So then you were born into it. Right. Okay, good. That's a good question. Thank you. Natural field experiments. And I think I have, 35 minutes? 3:15. My identification now will all arise from randomization, and I will be in the world where people do not even know that they're taking part in an experiment. Okay, so if you want to now along the way bring up informed consent or how I'm able to do this, we can think about these questions. I'm going to start by being in the not-for-profit world, give you a few giving facts, and then tell you a little bit about some of the research, and then I'm going to go to the for-profit world. So let's go to the charitable market. This is the way I think about this particular market. I see three major players. The government, of course, sets rules on the charities, and they set marginal tax rates and rules on how donors can write off perhaps the $10 million that they give to a charity. Within the NBER itself, there's been a lot of research, Marty Feldstein, Clotfelter, et cetera, looking at that relationship. When you change marginal tax rates, how do people's behaviors change in terms of giving? Very little evidence here. And what I mean by this is when the government sends a $20 million grant to the YMCA, how do they react? Do they then go out and raise less money? Do they use that as a gift to raise more money and then provide more of the public good? So that's an interesting question that still is not sorted out. My own research, I'm going to focus down here. The relationship between charities and specific donors. Okay, so why is this important? I'm looking at individuals. It's roughly, in any given year now, charitable giving is roughly 2 to 3% of GDP. So I think it's a big chunk of GDP that we know very little about why people give it. I think that's fair to say empirically. We have a lot of anecdotes. Individuals take up about 3/4 of that. Corporations, foundations, bequests, the rest. I'm not going to look at these at all. I'll be focusing on individuals. Okay, over time, how has individual giving changed? It's sort of interesting. As you can see, as a percent of personal income, it's kind of jogged down. And then in the late 90s, you have a sudden jump, and you can speculate why. And so can I, of course. Yes? What's that? A gift to a 501c that you can write off on your taxes in the giving to a charitable foundation. Not time. Monetary gift, pecuniary. Okay? So I sufficiently understate the importance of charity by not including volunteerism. Yeah, and as we'll see, that's going to be a big chunk of this. I'll have that in a minute. You're exactly, that's good intuition. Okay, so what I have here, and this is from 95, so I apologize, I don't have something later than that. This gives you a sense of how people give over income ranges, over age, and over education levels. Okay, in total, percent of households that give, back in 95 was about 2 out of 3. Now it's close to 90%. So more people give money now than they did back in 95. They gave about 2% of household income here, $1,000 on average. As you can see here, as a percent, it goes down and then back up. As a total of, this makes sense. So if most of you are in here, you should be giving, if on average 95, about $3,500 a year. I'm sure all of you are giving much more than that. And the reason why is because you're a college graduate or more, so you're down here as well. This is a little bit funky. I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. We can have different stories, which I don't have time to go into right now. But this gives you a glimpse of how giving varies over the life cycle. Okay? Now, where does this money go? A big chunk of it's to religious organizations. Right, 59.4% of total household contributions goes to religious organizations. That's because it's overweight. It's overweight in the poor. And education, you have a little bit here, 9%, and then you can see the others. Okay, I am just now starting experiments with this group, and it's only because I've given talks at these Lutheran organizations. The Lutherans are trying to raise money, and as part of the agreement, I get access to their entire database to run experiments. As far as I know, I don't know of any experiments with these religious groups. Okay, so I can't speak to that in my own data right now. Yes? Yeah, no, when you say anything back, you won't be in here if you get some good in return, some tangible good in return. Yes, if I'm in the YMCA and I have to pay for my kid to be in basketball, I do not think that would be in here. But if I give $1,000 and I can write it off, then they will be in there. I will not dig deeper into this. But that's right. Okay? So why should we study this? I think theoretically thinking about why people give to charities and what models best predict their behavior is a useful avenue for research. Measuring the key parameters of these models is also useful. Various elasticities can be important from a policy perspective. Collecting the information to construct a theory. So that's where this particular research agenda is going. Now, on a practical side, I think this quote picks up exactly what's going on in this industry. There is an extraordinary amount of money available. The lack is of good ideas on how to get the basket under the apple tree. And that's exactly right. So besides theory and policy, the demand side of the economics of charities is ill understood. And I've learned that in the last 10 or so years about how little the fundraisers actually know in terms of being able to make causal statements. Okay? So let's start at the beginning, and why in the world am I involved in this particular activity? So if you're an administrator, the dean at the University of Central Florida did something that probably most administrators would never do. I was an assistant professor in 1998 in the economics department in the business school, and the dean visited every department and said, I realize that we cannot be good at all kinds of research activities. Even though you have 26 people in the econ department, I know you can't compete in IO, labor, environment, et cetera, et cetera. So I want you to choose one area. And when you've all decided the area, come back and tell me, and then I will put all the resources into that area. That's exactly what happened. So we argued and argued and argued, and the area that the department chose was a specialty in environmental economics with a subspecialty in experimental economics. And that won something like 25-1 in our department. So of course I was the advocate of environment and experiment. And the dean then visited my office and said, now that you have won this battle, I want to give you $5,000 to start a Center for Environmental Policy Analysis. Congratulations on being the winner. I talk about a winner's curse. I thought about it for a long period of time and thought, I will do this provided I can use that $5,000 in a field experiment. And I think now you see the way that I roll. I see the world, I see it as an experiment, and I look at how I can use the variation that I observe and the variation that I can put into the world to learn something about economics. Everything that I am presented with in the back of my mind, I think, can I turn that into a field experiment? That's how I've always been since I was an undergrad at the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point. Okay, so that's why these field experiments at sports card shows and pin markets, the Cassie tribe, et cetera, that's where these arise. He talked to the officials, and they said, yes, you can let List go ahead and run this as a field experiment. Okay, so what I did then is I looked in the literature and tried to learn what are the best ways to use seed money. And what I learned was that this sector was filled with anecdotal evidence. People used it. University of Wisconsin's Coal Center, they raised $27 million before they went public in their drive to raise a total of 72 million. They raised 27 million in private. Fundraising schools and booklets will tell you authoritatively you should raise between 40 and 50%, between 20 and 50%. These are the right figures. And you ask, where did these figures come from? What's the underlying mechanism at work? Show me the data. In 1998, you would receive nothing. It's just a gut feeling. That's exactly what it was back then. Happened to be an interesting theory that Jim Andreoni wrote about how seed money can exclude bad equilibria in these giving games when you have a threshold public good, fixed cost. So his idea was seed money can exclude, for example, the bad equilibrium of everyone giving zero. And that in and of itself can lead to more money being raised. That's good. That's an interesting theory that we have. Same thing with refunds. What I have in mind here is that I announce we need to raise $5 million, which is beyond this particular study, but just as an example, we need to raise $5 million, but if we don't raise it, we will send the check back to you. Okay? Bagnoli and Lippmann have a theory in 1989 in the RE Stud that uses the same solution concept more or less as what Jim used in his seed money paper in the QJE. It works the exact same way. You can exclude bad equilibria by using a refund. Okay, and there are also some examples of that in practice. But what am I to do? I only have one charity, and I can't deceive people and tell them I received 20% seed money in one case, 50% in another. That's against the law in experimental economics. So what am I to do? Justine, what do you think? Here's what we did. We split that capital campaign into 6 smaller capital campaigns, saying that we needed to raise money for computers, for CEPA, for the Center for Environmental Policy Analysis. And then in those 6 cells, we ran a 3x2 with 3 seed levels, 10, 33, 67, crossing with a refund, no refund treatment. Okay? And what we found in that study is that seed money worked very well. In fact, on both the intensive and extensive margins, those improved as seed money went up. I don't think this is a general result, but it was a result over our range. And when you look at the fact that refunds did not work well in the way that they interacted, we could reject Andreoni's theory about seed money being used as a device to exclude bad equilibria. What these particular data are more in line with is that you can use seed money to signal the quality of your charity. And since these results were published, there have been a few papers now developing theory on using seeds as a signal of charitable quality. Okay, so that was paper number 1. Now it raises the question of, given you have upfront money, maybe you should use it as a match rather than just announcing that you have it. Okay? And a lot of you probably hear this on NPR. Send in your $100 now. We will match it 1-to-1 for the next hour. So your $100 will look like $200, and effectively they're trying to vary the price. They're cutting the price in half of giving. That's the idea. Okay, so that's exactly what Dan Rondeau and I were up to when we worked with the Sierra Club. And this is another mail solicitation, just like CEPA. We sent out several thousand letters to donors. The Sierra Club is the same way, sending out mail solicitations. We have a few controls. We compare seed to matching, and the match rate was 1-to-1. And again, what we found in that particular paper is the power of seed money. Seed money did very well. Matching did slightly worse, but they were both much better than both controls. Okay, so it gives us an idea about using upfront money. Now you can ask, that wasn't a fair test because you're using the wrong match rate. And fundraising strategists will tell you exactly what Kent Dove tells you. Never underestimate the power of a challenge gift obviously a 1-to-1 match, every dollar that the donor gives is matched by another dollar, is more appealing than a 1-to-2 match. And a richer challenge greatly adds to the match's attractiveness. This looks like the law of what in economics? It's exactly what we say about private goods, isn't it? If you can get one Snickers bar for $1, that's better than one Snickers bar for $2, but if you can get two Snickers bars for $1, you're really doing well. I mean, Dove is just reminding us that the law of demand is at work here. But the question is that model, is a private goods model a good model for charitable fundraising? So go ahead out and look in this industry at the time and look at what people are doing, including Drake, which received $50 million, and the donor said, you need to use this to raise more money in 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 matching solicitations. But there is no empirical evidence that that is true. You ask people, where's the empirical evidence on simply looking at a match and a price effect in charitable giving? This gets at how we should be modeling charitable gifts. No evidence of that at all. In fact, the best evidence was one guy running a 1-to-1 match in July, and then he decided to run a 1-to-1 match in December. A 2-to-1 match in December, and he found that he raised more money in December than July, so he said the match matters. We all know that December is the best time to raise money. Tax considerations, end of the year cheer. So Dean Carlin and I ended up writing this paper on, amongst other things, on looking at match rates. Okay, so you can try to guess what this is. National liberal nonprofit in the U.S. Political and socially oriented. Anybody want to take a guess? I can't tell you, by the way, but I'd love to tell you. But I'll let one person take a guess. I'll let you read the reply card first, actually. They send letters to regular donors. What they're going to have us do is they're going to give us one month to run our experiment. So we can send out roughly 50,000 letters. And we sent those out in August of 2005. And we got all this money from an anonymous donor, so this is all legitimate. What we're going to do is change the match ratio from nothing to 1-to-1, 2-to-1 to 3-to-1. Maximum amount available, 150, 25, and unstated. And there will be an example, a string, an ask string, which I'll show you on the card, of low, medium, or high. Okay, so exactly how did we run this natural field experiment? This is how. By putting these cards, these reply cards, in every letter. Okay, so here's what the card said. Troubled by the continued erosion of our constitutional rights, a concerned member, this concerned member was trying to go after one of President Bush's Supreme Court nominees. A concerned member has offered a matching grant of $25, $50, $100, or blank to encourage you to contribute to blank at this time. To avoid losing the fight to defend our blank, this member has announced the following match: $1, $2, $3 for every dollar you give. So for every, this is the ask string. This is highest previous contribution times 1. So we looked in the last several years and took out their highest previous contribution. Highest previous contribution times 1.25 times 1.5. You give, blank will actually receive X. Let's not lose this match. Please give today. Yes? In this drive. So if you go over 25, he only gives 25. If you give 20, he should be taking 5 back. If in this cell that has 25, do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, there's one concerned member that we'll see has offered a matching grant of 25,000, and let's say it's 1-to-1. Okay? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. We'll find that dollar value here did not matter. And I'm not going to take a stand on what charities really do. I can just tell you that the charities that I've worked with have been honest, and there's a real opportunity cost of a match dollar. But I'm not. I've never heard of that. Yeah. But I've never heard of it happening that if you get up to 25,000, the guy just says, I was just kidding, I'm not really going to give you, because that's in the contract, and then that's given. But yes. If you don't get to 25, he can take. That's in the contract.
He's in the contract, but does he do it?
I don't know. We didn't have that problem here.
But in general, do you know of any case?
I know of some cases where the guy has taken it, and I know of some cases where the guy said, use it for other things at the charity. Empirically, the cap didn't matter. And what I mean by that is when I look across treatment cells that vary 25, 50, 100 blank, that did not seem to affect the way people behaved in this experiment. Okay? Yes, just. I think it matters the underlying motivations for giving. And I think that gets at some of the underlying motivations of giving. And I don't have any theory or data on that, but I can certainly see the potential problem with that. And it is, I think reference point could be an interesting consideration there. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so when I say price elasticity, I mean it in a very narrow sense in a particular charitable drive. Because it could be the case that they think it's a scam. They think they're going to get the money anyway. So it's in that light, it's different from the elasticity that you get when you look at a change in the marginal tax rate. But this is exactly the elasticity that I want, though, right? Because I don't know if what happens in the other literature spills over to this. But when I think about cheating, I think a lot about the collusive model. It's almost the insights that you learn in that literature is similar to whether a charity wants to cheat the donors in this environment. I think a lot of those predictions would spill over to this particular environment about when to cheat, et cetera, et cetera. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, when I said cheat, I was trying to go back to Luigi because I think that's where you were going. These guys are just all cheating. That's kind of the elasticity that I want. If they are, then there should be no effect of match. Which we'll see if there is, actually, when I go ahead, Devin. Yes. Yes. What happens is when you do that, the sample sizes were so large here that we didn't gain a lot in power. So it's harder to do that when somebody else is doing the envelopes. So it's easier to give them uniform, and the benefits did not exceed the cost of doing that here. But I do have that calculation in this follow-up working paper about what you'd exactly gain. You don't gain much that here. But I do wish that I would have did something else in this experiment, and you'll see why in a minute. Okay, so let's talk about some data. If you just compare treatment versus no treatment, when I'm talking treatment, I'm talking about either 1-to-1, 2-to-1, or 3-to-1, you raise about close to 20% more money. And we're talking about, in total, I think we raised $75,000 or $90,000 in this drive. Okay, but where this actually comes from is interesting. This actually comes from entirely on the extensive margin. So it's the fact that more people are giving. The people who we think would be giving more, they're not giving more. In fact, the response rate increases by about 22% in the matching treatments. When you look at then across the ratios, those ratios perform about the same. 3-to-1 and 2-to-1 are a little bit better, not much, they're statistically the same. So this gives you a sense, now you can see what treatment I'm missing, because I never imagined that this would happen over this particular range. So I didn't worry about doing a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-3. Obviously this isn't going to be a general result, but it is a result over these match ratios that are typically used. And if this is a true result, a stylized fact, then you can imagine A, that we're thinking about the model of giving in a slightly wrong way, and B, charities are wasting a lot of money if they're being fair about what they're doing. Right? Because the opportunity cost of a match dollar means something. Go ahead.
Well, another to be considered would be the jury one. A concerned member has put up, $100,000 if you want to join them and put in your money too. And then you get at what you're saying earlier, that part of this may be a signal, as you say, other concerned.
Yeah, so I have that, right? I have has given 100,000, has given 50, has given 25, and has given blank.
And with the zero match?
Yeah, that's my baseline. Right? And then I have I'm crossing all those. Right. Justine. Yes. The total dollars given, not including the match, the dollars given are the same across 3-to-1, 2-to-1, 1-to-1. So this does not include the match money. So 3-to-1 doesn't raise less money than 1-to-1. It raises about the same. If you included the upfront money, it would raise more, right? But there's an opportunity cost of the upfront money. In seed money. So the Sierra Club, clearly you want the match, but what I just showed you with the Sierra Club, you would want that announced as somebody gave $100,000 in seed money, now we need more. That performed better than a 1-to-1 match. I'm not sure, but in all these we met it. So I can't speak to, and that will be charity specific and how many letters you sent, etc. Okay, now what I say about general result, clearly we have done now 1-to-2 with the NAACP, and 1-to-2 outperforms they perform about the same as 1-to-1, and both do better than the control. So now going to 1-to-2 is good, but is going to 1-to-100 good? Likely not, right? Yes. Yeah, we did. And in this particular study, it's not. So it's not intertemporal substitution. There is now a study that has come out that has found similar results, but has found some intertemporal substitution. In this data set, we did not. We looked at the next year's worth of giving. We did not find any of that going on. But to be intellectually honest, there is another study that has found some crowding out from the future. Yes. This is a warm list. This was a warm list. This was not an acquisition mailer. Sometime in the last 5 or 10 years. They don't give every month. Right. And then that's a good question about, are you just moving it up a month? So that's why we needed to look at contributions before that period and after. And in ours, you didn't have, it was surprising, I thought you would, but you didn't have intertemporal substitution in our data. Luigi.
To what extent you can generalize these results? Because this is a very peculiar sample. These are people of a particular sort of political inclination, belong to a
Exactly.
political organization. So they might respond in a particular way, but then you go to another sort of maybe more wide-wing organization, you find that
Yeah.
the results are completely different. So this is a problem.
It's a first step. Exactly. It's a first step. Now, my first guess will be that this will hold. And it has held in other types of groups. To me, it's more about religion versus non-religion. Because I think when you give to a religious cause, which is a big chunk, you're buying something different than what these other folks are buying. It's just a speculation. But I certainly agree. I don't know if will be one silver bullet in the end. There might be bins of knowledge, and then we have to think about an overarching theory that can help explain all of those data. And we're just getting started right now, but you're certainly right.
For example, if you think that there is some association between class and political
Yeah, of course.
these
Yep, exactly. And the ones that don't, there'll be no match effect. Exactly. That's right. That could happen. Again, my first guess will be this, and then we'll have to adjust when we get other data. Okay, so let's move on. I only have about 15 minutes here. Wow, 5 minutes, okay. There's other work. Some of you probably saw Stefano and Ulrika presenting our paper on door-to-door fundraising, where we're trying to really dig into this idea of social pressure versus altruism in a door-to-door fundraising drive. Of course, lotteries are another thing that you can contemplate in a fundraising drive. Donor gifts, of course, are interesting as well. Okay, we won't comment any further on those. Ongoing field experiments, the only thing I want to talk about here is that a lot of this game is larger donors. But it's very difficult to experiment with larger donors. Why? Because the fundraisers won't let me near big donors, okay? I've just happened to convince a few of them now. A few universities are allowing me to name some classrooms and to run experiments on naming classrooms. So that's the naming rights. And there's a really visionary business school in the Midwest that is allowing me access to a very rich data set in which their models predict that these people can give between $5, $10, $25 million, and they have not been approached in a very long time. So I'm going to be taking some of this to them as well. So you could have said the same thing. Does it generalize to larger donors? I hope we'll find out, right? Phone-a-thons in a pretty cheap way that we're doing experiments with Smile Train, etc. Okay. Lessons learned, I'm going to go quickly. Smaller givers do not seem to be buying a private good when they donate. And this is hedge, smaller, seem. Upfront money is important. Most effectively used so far is announced seed money. Non-price incentives can have very strong effects on givers. So when you look at donor gifts, having a donor gift, that can actually substitute for a warm list, which is sort of an amazing result because the charities all tell you that it's always about getting a warm list. But a very small donor gift can make a cold list person look like a warm list person. But that leads to the next question, that it's very critical how you initially get a person to give, the incentives that you use up front. And we talked a little bit about crowding earlier. Some types of incentives might crowd out reasons for giving later. Signaling charitable quality seems to stick. Okay, so let's talk about experiments with for-profits for a few moments. And I'm going to begin by talking about a Chrysler weight loss experiment. And this is an experiment whereby Chrysler allowed us access to all of their employees who were interested in a wellness program across their roughly 32 plants. And we went in and developed a scheme whereby there are some teams that were set up. They were anonymous teams. Some piece rate schemes, and some of the team mechanisms would go as follows. There are 3 other people on your team. You have an incentive of X, and you will be paid based on the largest loser of weight in your team. That's called a best shot mechanism. Weakest link mechanism. There are 3 other players on your team, and your financial incentives will depend on the person who performs the worst or loses the least amount. Weakest link. So it has predictions on weight loss and effort across that setting. I think it's fair to say that we've been finding, it's preliminary, but there's some evidence on the team incentive schemes being very powerful and being very close to what theory would suggest. Chinese manufacturing plant. There's a Chinese manufacturing plant that was interested in how to give bonuses. And they produce things like big screen TVs, computers, DVD players, etc. I became interested in whether the simple frames that we find in the lab that are very important, what I mean by that, for example, is framing a bonus as a positive versus a negative. You find very large effects in the lab. And I was very skeptical about whether that effect would manifest itself in the field over a long period of time. So we have these Chinese manufacturing plants participate in an experiment whereby we frame the bonuses as losses or gains. And we do it over a 6-month period. And amazing to me, what happens is these simple framing manipulations matter a lot over the entire 6-month period. The loss frame leads to roughly 1% higher productivity than the gain frame. They're both much higher than baseline, roughly 3 or 4% higher than baseline. Okay, so to me, I think that shows the power of these simple ideas that behavioral economists have found in the lab can actually have real effects in the field. And Devin has a very nice paper on this with Tiger Woods and how he's loss averse when he's putting, although Tiger's not really because he's too experienced. Ambassadors Group. This is actually combining field experiments with naturally occurring data. And what we're looking at here is they allowed us to run pricing experiments. Ambassadors Group travels high school students overseas. And they allowed us a few years of running pricing experiments. And they also gave us all of their naturally occurring data. I think this came up a little bit earlier. It shows the power of combining naturally occurring data that does not have exogenous variation with data that has exogenous variation. We're pretty close to having a paper written, this is with Levitt, that shows the complementarity in this particular environment. Okay, so I would say now watch for an experiment near you. I can't tell you the airline, but there will be a major airline pricing experiment starting next Wednesday. So watch for that. There's a large insurance provider that's now randomizing rate quotes. Again, I can't tell you the large insurance provider, but that's going on as we speak. And then there's kind of this busy website that is allowing us access to some of the people who answer their phones, and we're running experiments. That's where I want to end. And I've set up these guideposts for field experiments, artifactual, frame, natural field experiments, and I understand that all field experiments won't fit into one of these 3 guideposts. I'm just thinking about this as a way to guide our thinking about what a field experiment looks like. And I've taken it upon myself, so to speak, to have a clearinghouse of papers that roughly arisen in the last 10 or 15 years that include artifactual, framed, and natural field experiments. And it's free on this website. You will find paper titles, authors, and a PDF version of every paper. And it's free. It says .com, but I think that's for no given reason. There's no ads. This is just something that my team has put together. There are, I think, roughly 300 to 400 field experimental papers on this site. This isn't data, but at least it gives you a source to find papers that have data. And if you have a field experiment that's not on this site, please send it. There's a way to submit your field experiments to this particular site. Now, I've already argued that I see this as a high growth industry. You might be convinced, you might not be. What do I see as generation next? Exactly that last slide about working in collaboration with private firms. You see this explosion in development economics, these partnerships with governments and NGOs, and it's not surprising that there's a lot of interest and enthusiasm for that area. And you can understand why historically that we've gone that route. Now going this other route where firms will open up, and we have to be careful, of course. I understand confidentiality in IRB. It's available and it's possible to overcome those barriers. And when you think about it, working in collaboration with firms, profit or nonprofit, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. And you see this as a large potential chance to learn something important about economics. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I have a few more slides, but I know that I'm 10 minutes over, so I'm going to stop there and entertain any questions if you have them, or I can finish these slides. It ends on a methodological note, one of my favorite ways to end the slideshow, but I'm not going to tax you that much. Okay, so if you don't have any questions, we can call it a session. Otherwise, I'll entertain questions in public or private. Okay,